So we talked about, in the last video we talked about fetches, certain filter lands, cycle lands, cheaper, some really cheap one color choices, and basics. Now we're going to go on to duels. Dual lands, meaning the regular, more budgetary dual lands. There's a whole bunch of different types you can run. Dual lands as in they produce two colors. So in this case, in terms of budgetary, you have the Innistrad and the core set lands. So those come into play tapped unless you control a basic of either color it produces. So Drowned Catacomb here on the right has, if you control a swamp or an island already in play, comes into play untapped, otherwise it comes into play tapped. Another reason, good reason to run enough basics that you can often have the ones you need for it to come into play untapped. So you have Drowned Catacomb, Glacial Fortress, Sunpetal Grove, those are all core set ones. And basically there's combinations for all the allied colors, which we talked about. The allied colors are colors that tend to like working together. So green-white is a big fan, blue-white, black-blue, etc. Then we have the enemy colors in the Innistrad dual lands. That they do the same thing except they have enemy colors. So you have green-black and blue-green, and there are of course many others. And those are useful because they're not too expensive, but they're really solid dual lands, and they let you filter the colors you need. They give you have color choice. Then there we have, on the left we have Seachrome Coast, which is one of the Scars dual lands. These don't run very well in EDH. We'll talk about them, their uses in 1v1 games, but in multiplayer EDH they don't run so well because they almost always come into play tapped. However, if you're not running a lot of basics, your other two lands will also be coming to play tapped. So the coming to play tapped is not necessarily a bad thing. If you have a bunch of those and you want to run those instead because you have them already, or you are collecting them so you have them lying around, whatever the reason, they're a pretty solid dual land. If you get them in your opening hand or in the first couple turns, wonderful. Then you come into play untapped and that's great. If you don't, you don't. Usually you don't, which is why it's not the most ideal, and they are a bit expensive. So, as I said, I would probably try to stick more towards the core set. But depending on how many colors you have, you may want to run those as well. The more non-basics you need. Then we have, this is for black something, mono black, well, not mono black, black something decks. So, bi-tri or 5-color decks that have black in them. You have the Tainteds, which are, remember, I'm just giving you guys a broad spread. There are way more that will be in the list below, but this is an interesting one as well that I like. It taps for a colorless, or if you control a swamp, it can tap for a black or a green. And each Tainted does a version of that. So the same thing for Tainted Isle, except it's a black and a blue, or a black and a red, or a black and a white. So you need black in the deck for it to work, but it's a really nice duel that a lot of people don't know about or don't think about. And then we have Painland. We'll get to Painlands. Painland pretty much is the same thing as the duels, except when you tap for the color choice, it pains you. It pings you one. So in this case, you have Caves of Koilos, which is back from, I don't know, Apocalypse or something. Also not very expensive. That's a black-white one. So it taps for a colorless, or it taps for a black or a white, and does 1 damage to you every time you choose to do that. And there is the Yavimaya Coast. There's all sorts of Painlands throughout Magic. And they all do different things, but basically they're a version of, either a version of the dual land, or there are some Painlands that just give you different mana types. Taking the damage in EDH is not such a big deal. It's better to have more choice in colors. So Painlands are often a nice cheap option if you don't have a lot of budget. Talking about budget also, you have the Zendikar Worldwake lands. I think actually Zendikar ones in this case that are the dual lands. There's different for different colors. Comes into play tapped. It gains you a life, and it adds a black or a red when it's untapped. It can tap for either of those. And there's for all the different colors, so that's a really cheap, nice version to use. Then we have Manlands from Worldwake, although it's not only from Worldwake. There are older sets that have as well. But World Wake runs some of the best ones. So you can look back, but I definitely recommend in multicolor decks to run some of the manlands because they're usually rather helpful if you have the option. And if they help your deck, then definitely run them. Remember, the way you select from these is you pick the ones that are most effective in your choice of deck. As we mentioned before, there's a gazillion styles, and some styles run certain types of lands better than others. So, Stirring Wildwood, Celestial Colonnade, these guys, the reason I use them in decks is because their creatures have ways of blocking flying, or in Celestial Colonnade is flying, this has reach. So, running against decks that have lots of flying or that have flying generals, we mentioned that you have the 21 commander damage. When we talked about the generals, we talked about commander damage. So you definitely want ways to stop flying creatures and flying generals. So in that case, those are really good. Some have haste, tramp, whatever the various abilities are, but they're just a nice option, and they're also a dual land if you need to use them. Although they do come into play tapped, which is a side effect. They're actually pretty decently expensive now. When I first got them, they were cheaper, but if you can find them for cheap or you have them already, definitely go for it. Also, another cheap dual are the bounce lands. I mean, these are all names I came up with. They're not necessarily official lingo, but I call these bounce lands. Pretty much, when you play them, you have to return a basic land to your hand when you play them, and they come into play tapped. But they give you 2 colors at the same time. So they're like a 2-for-1 land. I always am concerned running them because I've run against lots of spot destruction, like people pick off different lands, and if you play one, it comes into play tapped, you put a land back in your hand, then they destroy it, it costs you not only a mana turn, but it is a 2-color, it's a 2-for-1 land, so it's doubly painful. However, it's a very cheap budget option, and not many people run land destruction EDH because land destruction is stupid as a play style, in my opinion. It's in competitiveness, it's great, but when you play multiplayer, playing a mass land destruction deck is not fun. Period. No one thinks it's fun. Destroying lands in specific areas may be okay, but nobody thinks that land destruction is fun. So these are often pretty safe, and they're very cheap. You can get them for 50 cents, maybe. So they're a really nice option for 2 colors if you need. Then we have another really obscure land card. This is it's called Ancient Spring. It's from the Invasion block. There are lots of these. It comes into play tapped. It taps for 1 color. But in a 3 or more color deck, it can also tap. You can also tap it, sacrifice it, to add a one-time burst of 2 of the other colors you need. So in this case, if you have a blue, black, white deck, you're tapping for blue for a while, and then you desperately need you need a black and a white, desperately. You can tap it, sacrifice it, and add a black and a white. So it's not amazing, but it's a decent choice, and there's, of course, for pretty much every color option, there's combinations. I only have one here, but feel free to check out the thing below, and hopefully the other links I put there will help with that. Then we have the most important multicolor cards. I mean, I'm not going to be discussing so much about combo lands, but these are really important for any deck that's running multicolor. These are the 3 to 5 color choices, meaning ones that can give you options for that. So on the side here, you have the Alara block 3 colors, 3-color filter choice, not filter, choice duals, whatever, triples, whatever you would call them. They're not duals, but they're 3-color. So they come into play tapped, and then they can tap for one of any given 3 colors. And there's for all combinations. So those are really powerful, and they're nice to use. They come into play tapped, so there are other better options, but once again, they're pretty cheap. So for budget decks, they're a nice choice if you would like them. And then we have the infamous Command Tower. It was built for EDH Commander, and it taps to add any 1 mana to your mana pool that's in your commander's costs. So remember, we talked back by the commanders that you have that your commander, it has certain colors that impact your deck. So pretty much regardless, you're going to have to generate mana from those colors. So it pretty much gives you 1 of any color that you need for your deck when it taps. So it's a really nice card. It just hits play untapped, So it's arguably the best one. It's pretty cheap now. It's maybe like $3, $4, $5 to get one. You only need one for Commander, and it's a really, really nice card. So definitely, that's an almost staple. There's some cards that are staple or most commonly used, if possible, and that's definitely one of them. Then you have the, I haven't seen a lot of people use these. You have the invasion block bounce triple lands. So they're pretty much the same thing as they do the same sort of penalty effect as the up top the Ravnica block lands do, which is that when it comes into play, you must return a non-layer card, sorry, to your hand. You're not going to be running many layers, so basically return another land to your hand. But unlike those duels up top, it does not come into play tapped, and it taps for one of each color. I don't know how expensive they run. I think they're also still pretty cheap, so you might want to run those if you have the option, and they're pretty budgetary. Then we have full color Pain Land from, this is just one example from Onslaught, and this lets you, it comes up by taps for a colorless, or taps for one of each, of any color of your choice, any color that you could produce, and it deals 1 damage to you. Then we have Forbidden Orchard, which taps for any color, and gives your opponent a 1/1 flyer, which in EDH is not a big deal. It gives you any color, it comes to play untapped. It's really nice. And then Reflection Pool gives you taps for any mana color that another land of yours could make. So in EDH, you tend to have all your colors in play, or that could be used in play, so it taps for any color. It's another staple. All right, I'm going to be talking about utility lands and maybe some other staple lands when I come back in the next video. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Definitely click up here to subscribe. Click here for the next video, and the playlist should be over there. And hope to see you guys next time.